you bet, Ken.
Okay. Yeah. So, topic of today's webinar is supporting operational excellence through mine digitalization. So, what we're ultimately trying to be able to do, if you're a mining client or a mining house, and you guys, we all know this, right? You're trying to get better, and you're trying to become more efficient. And part of the Eprioc brand is trying to be able to do, right, is besides equipment sales, is drive it through digitalization. So we're going to talk about today how digitalization supports improvement within a mine. Okay, so I got two questions for everybody that is joining. First question here is for the audience and whoever wants to be able to jump into this. And I hope everybody can hear me. It may be a faulty connection on my end. I don't know. And just to be warned, sometimes my internet will drop out here because I think everybody's sitting on it. So if things go blank for a minute, I apologize. I'm just giving everybody a heads up. So first question for everybody, and if someone can answer, how do we improve, say, mucking, development, drilling, scheduling, etc.? Does anybody have an answer for that? Answers. All right.
Make sure they buy Eprioc gear.
There you go. There's a good one. Right? So really what it is, but what we're trying to be able to do is maximize what we call a value-added activity by eliminating or reducing non-value-added activities. And I know you've heard me talk about this before. And that's kind of what it is that we're trying to be able to do. So as Jamie said, if we buy a piece of Eprioc gear, hopefully we're starting to eliminate some of the non-value added stuff. So quick question or a quick comment. So what is value added? Value added means any activity that physically changes a product, the customer is willing to pay for it or a decision is made. So if we think about mucking and heading, right? Loading a truck with a scoop is value added. The customer is willing to pay for that, right? And we're physically transforming that product. But what's non-value added is putting it in a REMA, maybe, right? Or putting it someplace else to be rehandled again. So value-added activity, we want to do it right the first time and try to be able to do it as little as possible. So, second question, what are the three major forms of loss that impact mining operations? And if anybody has any comments on this, or if everybody wants to sit quiet, that's fine. Anybody wants to comment, please share.
Loss of time is one of the biggest ones, I think.
It certainly is, Jamie, and we're going to talk about that. Anybody else have any comments?
Dilution, the big one?
It is too. I'm going to bump you guys up one level, and then we're going to talk about specifically what Jamie and Andy said. First one is what we call overburden, and this is not overburden from waste when we think of mining or open pit, right? Overburden is the Japanese term what they call Muri, and it's called uneven workload. So some processes have more workload, some have less. Some people have more work, some people have less. That's one major form. The second major form is what Jamie mentioned. 7 forms of waste, and I'm going to talk about that specifically, but one of them is around time loss, right? Waiting specifically, that category. The third category is what we call variation or Mura, and it's process instability. Three terms of Muri, Muda, and Mura come from the Toyota production system. So originally it's out of classical manufacturing, but it certainly applies to mining. The agenda for today is we're going to talk about these 3 forms of loss, unstable, stable process, 7 forms of waste. We're going to talk about burden. We're going to talk about how to be able to address these 3 forms of waste, which is what we call a stability platform, and it involves 3 essential elements: standard work, workplace organization, control and response, And you're going to see how these themes, these three things have worked when we've implemented mobile airs to address the above three things. And then the other thing is underpinned, and you guys know this about engaging the workforce, and we're going to talk specifically about that. And we're going to talk about the stability platform and what a digital mind does to be able to help us with this stability platform. Talk a little bit about mobile airs and specifically some of the experiences that we have, which is this digital mind, the value proposition. Then we're going to talk about how mobile airs or a digital system strengthens our stability platform. So that's the agenda for our. So the first time I've just introduced the three forms of loss, and now we're going to talk about it a little bit further. So again, I'm going to engage the audience a little bit here if you guys have any comments. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is reduce variation. We want to move towards a stable process. And if I gave you this graph on the left, right, which is tons per shift, can you guys tell me anything from what you see? And I'll explain as we go through, but I'd like to hear if you guys see any observations from this graph at the left.
Unstable.
Okay.
It's like a tooth circle.
Anyways, okay. This would be a mining output sitting on the left side. And this is typically kind of what I saw at Hemlo. If I was to plot all the data points of production per day, you know, coming out of a mine, I would notice that that green line, so this is tons, this would be days, say on the bottom for a year. I've just picked arbitrarily 3 months, right? And these are tons per day going up the left side. On average, I'm averaging about 1,891 tons a day. However, you see these two little red lines? And what that is telling me is that my process, it's realistically to see it drift anywhere between 0 tons per day, is that bottom red line, all the way up to 4,300 tons per day. So the outcome of this is that, you know, on average, I make about 1,900 tons a day. However, some days I can be really good. I can be 4,200 tons, 4,300 tons. And, you know, the general foreman might say to the supervisor, boy, what did you do today? It really worked out. And then the corresponding is I can have 0 tons per day. What happened today? The upshot of this is that 4,300 down to 0 is realistic. It does not mean I had a good day. It does not mean I have a bad day. It is just a process that runs with a wide amount of variation. So when I look at that, I can have really good days, I can have really bad days, and the outcome is I don't know what I'm going to get day to day. I likened it to my trip, my commuting trip to Toronto every day. Some days are good, some days are bad. Some days I don't know how long it's going to take me. When I expect it to be good, it's bad from that point of view. So now the biggest piece of this is try planning in this environment. Try planning for what the next task should look like when I have no clue of what is coming down the pipe at me. It's just good day to bad day. So from this, I cannot necessarily use the past to predict the future. What I'm trying to ultimately to get to is a more stable process where I can use the past to predict the future. Now, in this case, my average has moved up a little bit, but what I've ultimately done is decrease that variation between the red lines. And now you can see, as opposed to being 4,300 tons difference, now I'm looking down at about 3,200 tons difference, 3,300 tons difference. It now becomes more stable. I have a better idea what to expect. Now, when I drop below 529 tons, something is truly going wrong. There's something different today than about all the other days. If I go above 3,700, there's something truly better today than what it was those other days. When I drop above or below those red lines, now it's time for investigation. If I stay on the left side when I'm all over the place, there really is no point of investigation because That is the behavior your process told you. And even though you may want 2,500 tons a day on that left side process, it'll give you what it's going to give you. It doesn't care what your target is. It's really about trying to squeeze out this variation. So I'm going to expand a little bit on this concept as we talk about this. So now we're going to talk about stabilizing a process before new equipment. And I may sound like a heretic here. So please don't shoot the messenger on this one. So again, we had that left side process, which we talked about before, unstable process. We've done some work now, and basically the idea of this presentation is to get us to a stable process. What is the work to get us to a stable process? That's what the bulk of this presentation is about. So now I've done some things and I've gained a more stable process, and you can see how I've reduced the spread in my data. And now the last piece now is I've further improved it again by bringing in new equipment. The idea being is that I can buy new equipment as a miner and bring it in, but if I still do deal with the same root causes and problems day in and day out, a new piece of equipment is not necessarily going to help me. I know Kevin and I have had discussions around things that when I think about drilling and other things too, we can buy new pieces of equipment and sure enough, we will improve drilling. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the end process of better fragmentation is going to be better, because there could be a lot of other things masking that improvement up front. Doesn't mean that it's not right to buy a drill, but what it's saying is you're trying to be able to harvest the value of that drill. So what I'm trying to be able to do is stabilize my process first. So if I think of the 3 steps, if I go from an unstable process to a stable process, I'm trying to make it the best I can with the given equipment and process. Then when I've made it as best as I can, now a new piece of equipment starts to really yield benefits because I understand what I had before and I understood everything that I could do with what I had before an existing system. So when we talk about capability, stability is about keeping a process within lines and trying to be able to squeeze it. Capability now is the ability to meet spec. So even though I've stabilized my processes, I add a new piece of equipment. Now I've got the ability to start meeting specification. A process will do whatever it is that it wants to do. It really doesn't care necessarily about the specification you're going to set. So make it stable, then improve its capability. So a little bit, that was about the unevenness in the system, a little bit now with regards to waste, and one of the things that Jamie was talking about. So when we go in the underground or any other type of process or on surface, wherever, you're going to notice 7 forms of waste, right? And these are the things that we try to get rid of within the process. So if I reduce waste, the value added activities become much. So there are 7 forms, and I'm going to talk about some examples in the underground. First one, transportation more than necessary. So example is multiple movements of muck. So if we think about in a development process, there always seems to be a lot of movements of waste, right? We move it from one crosscut to another crosscut because we never know what to do with it. Or that mucking fleet is not available to help us move this waste, for example. Another one is inventory. Sometimes we don't have enough and sometimes we have too much. So we may not have enough of the right rock bolts and too much of another. Motion. So this is about excess motion, right? So if we think about an ITH drill or a top hammer, right? And we think about our Simbas as compared to an old conventional drill, right? There's a lot of movement in setup. Whereas if we think about an ABC total on a Simba, it's far less movements. It's far more precise. Waiting. This is the one Jamie said. You know, lost time, waiting on prints, waiting on instructions from supervisors. You spend a lot of overproduction. This is always a favorite of mine because overproduction, it's making more than what you really need. And overproduction is a favorite of mine because we think from a supervisor's point of view, every day I'm trying to be able to hit a certain amount of tonnage for muck. That may mean that I over muck some stopes and under muck other stopes. So what ultimately happens is we become out of balance on plan. So some stopes get mucked a lot quicker, whereas the hard mucking stopes need to get done in order so that I can fill them to keep the plan. So overproduction is about meeting plan, right? Not doing more, not doing less, but keeping balance of plan. And the last one is over processing. This is making something too complicated, right? Doing more than really what is necessary. And when I look back at my time, sometimes when I've looked at drill letters or blast letters, they make them far more complicated than what necessarily the blaster needs from that point of view. And I know there's sometimes legal requirements around that. Don't make it more difficult than what it needs to be. Last one, and I've just got a few bullets on this one, is what we call burden or uneven workload. So when we think about a supervisor or technical people or what everybody else does, right, in the underground, and you guys are aware of this, right, there's a lot of firefighting behavior, right, from one crisis to the next crisis. There's lack of support or a plan B. So when a supervisor or a crew goes underground, generally it's like, well, I'm going to get what I get, right? This is the plan. We'll see how well it goes, right? There necessarily, not necessarily is a plan B before we go underground or people to support, right? Lack of technical support in the underground. So getting people underground from a, engineering, geologists, etc., ease of access support is difficult. Not knowing through the shift if we're on plan or off plan, again, can kind of lead to a lot of firefighting behavior. And we don't necessarily know if somebody's following standard or even if a standard exists for how to do a certain amount of work. So this causes a lot of uneven workload between people from that point of view. So now we're going to talk about the stability platform. I just got to take one quick minute here. I got to go let the dog in. I can hear it whining. 1 minute.
Do we get to all say nasty things about Ken now that he's not there?
I like to wait till he is here to say nasty things about him. He prefers it that way.
Does he? Okay, then he knows who his friends are, right, Nathan?
Oh, exactly. Doesn't mean we're not friends. Friends can be honest with each other.
Just doubt whether he
Oh,
will
very
be back.
true.
I think the
Very
dog
true.
might lock him out.
Yeah. He didn't say if he was going to take the dog for a walk or not, if he was coming right
Oh, I'm
back.
back. I just heard that. No, 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 no. I'm not leaving you hanging.
It wasn't me, it was Nathan, I swear.
Okay, yeah, I can imagine what he's doing. Oh, anyways, so you've seen how waste occurs. We've seen it in terms of variation. We've seen it in terms of the 7 forms and burden. And what we're going to talk about now is the stability platform, which is really trying to be able to get to how we're trying to, stabilize this process and reduce variation. So addressing the 3 forms of loss. So this is what we call a stability platform. And this is what I learned about in Vale and as other places that I've worked, and then bringing it here. This is how we've tried to be able to go. There's really 3 pillars of addressing loss. There's the first one we call standard work. So that's the current best practice for trying to be able to do something. And then we try to continuously improve it. Next one is workplace organization. If my workplace is designed for the work that needs to get done in terms of tools and equipment and supplies, it's much easier to get things done. And then the last piece is where we've really focused heavily within Mobile Aris from the point of view is control and response. When things don't go to plan, what do we do and how do we know? And then we've taken the control and response piece, and you're going to see it come through here, and used a lot of standard work with it at the same time to develop that control and response. It's all underpinned by what we call engaging our people. So these pieces of work are not done in isolation. It's about engaging the workforce to be able to do these pieces of work from that idea. And we're going to talk a little bit about, how the workforce is engaged and how people are motivated, driven from that point of view, because they all work together. So we're moving towards a process with less loss, a process that becomes more stable. So this first one is what we call standard work. And this is basically is a procedure or how we do work that's made up by four elements, what we call content, sequence, timing, and outcome. I want to put the right content in the right sequence with the right timing, and I should get my outcome. So this is an example of standard work that we implemented at Hud Bay 777 with mucking. And then, we think about mucking as well. It's pretty straightforward. Why do we really need a standard or procedure around this, right? But if you think about it and you dive a little bit deeper, how you muck does have a standard, and there is a certain process of doing things. So in this case, what we had here, up in the top case with this one, if I think about a standard, is the most efficient way they muck at Hud Bay 777 is where they can make use of a fuel truck and an early bird crew. And the unique thing about 777 is they only blast once a day. So if I start in the morning, I'm hot seating with the mucking crew. I'm mucking all the way through my shift, right? At a certain time, a fuel truck comes in, should take about 30 minutes to fuel and service. I keep on mucking. I muck through lunch. I muck through to the end of my shift, and then I leave at 17:30. And then coming into the night shift, right? You cage down at 2100. There's a blast clearing. There is a equipment pre-op. I do an FLRA in my stope. Then I start mucking, and then I service again, and then I muck all the way through my shift until a hot seat till the crew comes in at the end of the day to hot seat with me, and then I come back up here. In total, if I follow this process and it was to work ideally, I would muck for 11 hours. If I was to do on night, the best I could do is 8.5. The interesting thing about 777 was, they wanted to have each crew muck in a 24-hour period at least 20 hours. Well, if this is the best you can do, I don't see 20 hours occurring here. And this assumes there's no problems. So it's about setting what is realistic, and it's about setting how it should work. Right, so that is an example of standard work. It's developing standards to be able to do work. If I look at the worst case down here, where I have no fuel truck and I have no early bird crew, the best I can do is about 15.75 hours. Again, that's nowhere near 20. So I may want 20, which is my specification, but I'm nowhere near capable of being able to get to that from the way we currently lay it out. So this is an example of standard work. So this is how we deal with, people following task, again, to reduce variation. So the hypothesis with standard work, it's built as a hypothesis, is if we do the right work, which is the content in the right sequence according to the timing, then we should get the desired outcome. So if I follow the sequence in the above flow chart or the above standard, right, I should get 11 hours, assuming we don't have any problems. And that's the best I can do. This is just a real quick example on workplace organization because it is another element. And what I'm going to talk about is Valet Thompson and an example of workplace organization. When I was a Valet employee back in 2012, this would have been done. So if I was to give you the Bolter warehouse sitting here prior to workplace organization, does anything stand out to you guys in terms of issues? Does anybody have any thoughts?
Doesn't look very easy to access. The screen is bundled together, not very organized from what I can see, Ken.
Very good, Jamie. Boy, I tell you, man, you're getting some good brownie points today.
Love it.
So to your point, exactly the same what Jamie was saying, right? It's not really kind of set up. It's really not sitting on anything. It's hard to access, right? There's a lot of crap that's laying around, right? And it's dark. It's hard to find things. With workplace organization, you can see the afterwards, right? Now try maintaining it, I know, is a different story. Now I've got screens sitting on a pad with proper labeling and lighting. Now I can really see things. So if I have a workplace that's unorganized, again, it leads to burden, it leads to variation, it leads to frustration of trying to be able to get, it leads to not being able to meet plan if I'm going around looking for stuff from that point of view. Last piece here, control and response. And I'm going to talk a little bit more, and I'm going to, this is where a lot of our work is lied within. So control and response, you guys may know it as short interval control, right? And basically it's rooted in a couple of ideas. We want to identify outputs from a process and identify the factors that affect these things. So if I'm looking at, say, mucking hours, and I want 11 mucking hours from my shift, which is really kind of the process output, what are the things that affect that? Those are the things I'm trying to be able to control. And what we're trying to be able to control is a strategy, or develop a strategy around controlling these output or inputs such that I will get the desired output. So this was an example of a control plan, and I'm going to bump back to what the standard you guys just saw of what we're trying to be able to do when we wanting to be able to control the process. So here in this one is a control plan for maintaining productive hours of work at Hemlo, and there's various things I'm trying to be able to control from that point of view. I'm not going to get a whole lot into this, but this is an example of, you know, the strategy of control of what we're trying to be able to do. Sorry, I'm just going to bounce back. So if I look here, right, and I think of control and response, in the red now is triggers, right? This is our control and response. And if I'm a coordinator within short interval control and trying to keep these things to 11 hours or get the most amount of productive time, what I'm asking is at 6:30, I expect the scoop to be operating. If it's not operating or it's not physically mucking, I, as the coordinator, now are saying, okay, what's going on? Right? I need to find out what's going. That fuel truck should be in there no longer than 30 minutes and get back mucking. If it's been sitting in there for longer than 30 minutes, I need to know what's going on as the coordinator and investigate. If I stopped early, stop time is meant to be 5:30 p.m. If I stopped early, I, as the coordinator, need to figure out what's going on, right? So it's about trying to be able to control the process such that if I see deviations, I'm doing something. And that's what we call control and response. Okay, now we've got a couple of slides on this platform of what we talked about, engaging the workforce. And again, when we think about trying to be able to drive behaviors and whatnot. So I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit about what we call the ABC model of behavior. First piece is what we call the A, or the antecedent, right? And it's the thing that prompts behaviors. Things like standards, signs, when we do training on, you know, let's say drill training or other things, right? That is a writing procedures. These are forms of, if I give you the procedure, you know, now I would expect you to follow that procedure to be able to do something. That's what we call the antecedent. So I give you a procedure to do something. The next thing that leads to is the actual behavior. So what the person does. That person may go fix that piece of equipment, or may operate that drill to that procedure, etc., or may do whatever they do. It's the behaviors, what a person says or does. The last piece now is the consequence. So I, as the drilling operator, even though I may have ABC total and I may have a procedure, right? What I do ultimately in the end, follow that procedure, or I may not follow that procedure, but ultimately what happens in the end, what you do, there's a consequence that's provided. So The operator may decide not to use ABC total and just drill on manual because there's a payback for them. There's a reason why that person does it. And 80% of the behavior of that operator not following a procedure is dictated by the consequence. So if he's doing a procedure and there's no consequence, or he feels satisfied in doing what he's doing, he's going to keep doing it, even though it may not be what we want. So just because I give him a procedure, just because I train him, does not mean he's going to follow that procedure and use ABC total. There's a reasons why that person will continue to do what they do. And when we think about, getting guys to be able to follow a procedure, it's not necessarily about giving them more training. It's not necessarily about giving them a better standard. It's really 80% of it is what happens to the guy following it or not following it, right? This is where we really want to impact. So when we say, when we think about Sixth Sense and we think about some of the other things with regards to opportunities where we can improve drilling over shift, there are reasons why people don't do what they do, right? There are reasons why, they redrills happen. There are reasons why guys won't use the technology we've got. And it's really about providing the right consequences to encourage use of technology, not making better technology necessarily. So a little bit around that, right? When we understand behavior, there's 4 elements, what we call the DCOM model. So I ask somebody to go and drill today, right? So one of the first things I have to do is give them direction. I have to give them a goal. I have to give them work instructions, and I need to be able to make sure they're aligned or understand what's expected of them today. So that's direction. The next piece is competence, right? So can they do the job? Are they trained to do the job, right? This is one piece where we really help with training guys to do a specific job. So I could say to the operator that's the driller today, I want you to achieve 100 meters. Here's your work assignment. Here's your instructions, and you're trained to be. So again, right, if they're trained, they can actually do this. Opportunity now. So I may want you to do this work, but if there's barriers there, such there's insufficient ventilation or it's blocked or whatever, I can't do the work that you want. First 3 things are as a function of mind management and mind supervision. Competence, opportunity. What you're trying to be able to give guys to do a job. In the end, right, motivation. Either they do or they don't, right? And this is the hardest part, is what we want to do is apply consequences effectively to move people from I have to do this work, wanting to do this work. This is the most difficult part, and this is kind of the frontline leadership and leadership within a mind. This is what we're ultimately. So if I look at this cascade of performance from what we're trying to be able to do from superintendent down to operator, the behavior of my operator ultimately, if I'm a supervisor, what would I like them to see them to do? I'd like to see them follow work methods and standards, right? I'd like them to be able to be proactive in fixing problems. To work towards meeting daily production goals. That's, if I'm a supervisor, that's what I want my guys to do. So as a supervisor, what my behavior is that when I come in to that workplaces, I want to understand and observe the work. Is the work being done to standard, right? Is it meeting performance? And I'm providing feedback. Biggest job of the supervisor, his behavior is to really drive the consequences of the operator. It's not to firefight necessarily. It's not to do other things, but he's really trying to be able to do as a supervisor is provide the right consequences to the operator such that he engages in that behavior. I look at the general foreman level now, or the mine captain, right? I'm trying to drive the consequences now, or provide consequences. My behavior is to provide consequences to my supervisor. What I'm trying to be able to do at the GF level is provide positive feedback on the number and types of interactions I have with operator. And I want to review performance at the end of the shift or through the shift, right? Or the quality of entries of the way work is done. If the supervisor knows that I, as a GF, am going to review work and how I've interacted with my employees or my guys, they're more likely to engage in the behavior that you want, as opposed to that I'm not sure if if my GF's going to talk to me about these things. The idea of digital, and we're going to get to this, is to allow all of these things and everything that I've talked about to happen much easier than the way it does today. And then the superintendent, and I'm not going to get into this, his behavior is to drive consequences of his general. What the superintendent needs to do is right behaviors of his GA. So the importance of driving consequences as opposed to antecedents, the consequence always follows the behavior. Consequence can increase or decrease or maintain the behavior. The characteristics of the most powerful consequences are they happen soon after the behavior. They're important to the performer. Ability of occurring. We want to catch people in the act of doing it right. What we're trying to be able to do is provide 4 positive consequences to every 1 negative. If somebody's always beating on me in a negative way, I'm going to give the bare minimum. If I'm catching people of doing things right in the act, I'm more likely to engage in it. So we want to be able to tip the balance to the desired behavior, right? The consequences that we provide, right? We want to make sure it encourages or discourages the behavior. We want to make sure it's timely. We want to make sure it's important to the performer, right? I could do a lot of stuff, and if I don't give a rat's ass, it doesn't matter, right? And probability that's going to happen, right? So we're trying to drive these 4 areas in 4 pillars in the right direction. We want to tip that balance. Okay, so I've talked a lot about behavior, and I've talked a lot about waste and, how control and response and standardization, et cetera. Now we're going to talk about how digital helps with that. Trying to be able to strengthen this pillar, which we've talked about, standard work, workplace organization, control and response, and engaging the workforce, right? If we provide data from multiple sources in a real-time environment, all these things are much easier to be able to do. So it just seems logical, right? If I'm giving you data and information, then all these things are much easier to do. I'm not going to go through mobile ARIS, but that is the idea. This is our data management system. This is our ability to give data back to people to make decisions better, to support the things that they're trying to do, to reduce variation, reduce waste, and reduce burden. So expectations from an integrated digital system. And this is our experience in Canada. So reduction in the waste, right? There's 3 areas, if I think about those 7 wastes, where we've really impacted: locating the equipment, resources at the right place at the right time, and a process to identify issues and opportunities. This is about reducing waste. So locating equipment, is also about workplace organization, right? If I can find things easily, as opposed to going looking for things if I know right away. Equipment and supplies, right? Resources at the right place at the right time. So this is about, swapping out equipment, understanding if things are being used the way we want them to be able to do, alignment of resources. And then we have a process to identify issues and opportunities. So coming out of 777, we understood quickly if a remuck was not being used, if we were meeting plan, if we had prioritized the fuel truck, and how we redeployed resources. So if I'm seeing how the mine is actually operating, I'm able to actually do things a lot quicker, a lot easier, and reduce waste. The second piece is around reduction of variation. So the Hudbay and Laurent experience using short interval control. And basically what normally happens And what typically happened before is I'd plan my shift, I'd execute my shift, and at the end of the shift, I got one. Now within short interval control, we're trying to be able to repeat that process, but in a series of steps within the day. In my shift, I execute, I review at a regular time, I revise, and then I have an end of shift. And these three middle steps you may do a couple of times within shift. So I plan it, which is the last shift review, right? It's collaborative. I'm planning for this shift coming up. I execute, and hopefully I'm executing to standard and I'm collecting data. And then at some point, I'm going to review within shift how things are going, right? And I may undergo some problem solving at that time, and I'll replan my shift. I execute again, and then I have an end of shift report. And this is what we've done at Hudbay, and this is what we're doing at Laurent, is implementing this process. And if I have data coming back within this process, it makes it far easier to execute as opposed to a pen and paper. Within 777, if I think about this, this is an example of standard work and within a control and response framework. It's basically outlining what Nathan, our coordinator, was doing day in and day out. His morning routine from 6 in the morning to 5 at night. Basically in the morning, he was lining up the crews for mucking, understanding what the priorities were for the day, etc. Through the shift, he monitored how things were doing on a control and response, and then adjusting production through the day to meet target. And at the end of the shift, there was a reporting period. So this is about control and response and standardization. A little bit on reduction of burden now. This is really about the Laurent experience. So we've talked about variation, we've talked about waste. Now we're talking about a little bit of reduction in burden. And if I'm providing data to people easier, and I've got standards that are easily available and people are doing work, me as a supervisor now allows me to do other things that still need to get done. The only way I can do that is by removing some of this burden of firefighting and other things. So I want them to spend more time doing job observation. I want them to spend more time on stope preparation, a supervisor to lead problem solving efforts from that point of view, inspections, etc. And what we found from the Laurent experience by having this coordinator in place with using Mobile Arison support, right? There was now collaborative planning within the shift between the coordinator and the supervisor. So if problems were starting to happen within the shift, the supervisor now calls to the coordinator and says, okay, what should we do now? And there's some sort of collaboration that is happening because I have people in place, I have a process in place, and I have data, right? And now we've moved actually to a point where the coordinator now is developing with the supervisor a plan B before shift. So they're already anticipating what could happen and how we could go about being able to do that or plan against it. Last two slides coming up, guys, a little bit about engaging our personnel with a digital system, right? So again, in order for people to be able to accomplish their tasks, I got to be able to provide them three things up front: competence and opportunity. If I provide them direction up front, so it's the provision of targets. If I provide them digital information via like a tablet with procedures and drawings, it's a lot easier to figure out within shift or prior to shift what it is that I need to be able to do and how it's meant to be done, right? Competence. There's real-time problem solving that can go on here now, because if something is going wrong, I can contact somebody to be able to do something about this, and we can undergo some sort of problem solving within that shift. Again, I got to have digital to be able to do that. Opportunity, right? If I'm trying to be able to get a job done, but I can't find supplies, and now I have a real-time location with regards to supplies, now I can find things. Also, too, determination and removal of bottlenecks prior to executing the work. So again, if my work is planned better and I understand in real time where things are at, I can remove bottlenecks for people to be able to get to their workplace and do the work that they want to do. last piece here, consequence support. So with a digital system now, I can now support or provide the right consequences more efficiently before without having a digital system. So again, if we go back to this operator behavior, we want them doing work according to a standard, performing it safely. We want them to be proactive in problems. Supervisor, I have to provide those consequences now to that. The way I provide those consequences is doing a review of the work, observing how they're doing the work, providing feedback, which is discussion, consequences, etc., understanding where they are with respect to target and the end of performance for the shift. Right? That's what I'm trying to be able to do. Now, if I have digital to be able to do that, right, I have information readily available to have that discussion with my, I know where he's at in comparison to the plan, where he's at in comparison to other work. And I also have tools available such as procedures, such as drawings, etc., to me on that digital platform. It makes it a lot easier to engage in a productive conversation with my operator. So what I'm doing is driving the desired behavior. If my operator can count on me being there at a regular time frame to be able to do this, because me as the operator knows when the supervisor now is coming through the digital workplace, which could be a good thing or a bad thing if you're an operator, at least I have an opportunity to prepare for it now from that idea. So through digital support, we're freeing up time for a supervisor to do more of these things, to have more robust conversations with his operators to drive the behavior that you want. So in summary, guys, this is what we talked about. The 3 forms of waste, 3 forms of loss, I should say, unstable process, the 7 wastes, burden. We talked about the stability platform to be able to improve those areas, which is standard work, workplace organization, control and response, and engaging the workforce, all the behavioral stuff we've talked about. We've talked about the value proposition for a mine to strengthen that stability platform. I didn't really talk about mobile errors here a whole lot, and I'm going to put on a separate webinar to talk more about that. Talk about more about the product itself. The expectations of if we put mobile errors in, how we can positively affect that stability platform. That's it. If you guys have any questions, thoughts, comments, etc., we have about 7 minutes left.
Hey, Ken.
Yes, Jamie.
Can we take some time next week? My guys weren't able to make the call today. I got a few of them off on holidays. Can we, you and I, go through this presentation with them? I think this is something that would be very useful for them to have in their minds, especially when they're in front of the customers, when we can get back in front of our customers talking about, value adds and ways that we can help them. So can we set some time aside and do that together next week?
Oh, for sure. No, not a problem. Yeah.
All right, I'll set something up.
Ken, it's Paul. Well done. I like the way you drew it. Easy to follow. And I think that you'd sent something out earlier today about CIM, and there was one of the speakers there speaking of culture. In my mind, it was written as a culture change, how to engage, let's say, the operators and the GFs and even the superintendents. I think it needs to be mapped out for us as Jamie, I think, was alluding to help us better engage and get culture change. Because I think we have the equipment. I think we have the right line as far as making these processes better, but it's having the engagement of the operators and the people at site that we need to try and come up with a better tool. And I think you're well on the way here because you've defined it. We just need to put actions in place that help us get that. And maybe part of that CIM presentation will give us some of that. But I think it's good.
It could very well, Paul. I know, when I go back to my time at Hemlo, this was the whole behavioral piece was always the absolute hardest thing to be able to deal with. You know, when you're trying to be able to work at from the supervisor level, because you're still kind of stuck within how people work, and it's really trying to be able to, yeah, we can certainly work on that and see if there are more things, you know, other things that we can do around that for sure.
And quickly, just to finish, I think the operators know they're being watched. They've accepted that. The Certique and some of the things, you know, they're watching us. That was the initial when we started to really a couple years ago talk about that. But I think that they recognize now this is the new way of operating is measuring and improving. So I think that they've come on side. Now it's just a matter of putting the right places or the right check boxes there to help us show value. Yeah. So no, well done. Appreciate it.
Totally agree. Yeah.
I'm with Paul on that. I think the more tools we can give the account managers, the better, and help them understand. It's a good point.
Ken, you've recorded this, if I understood?
Sorry, Travis?
You recorded this session, if I
I
understood.
did.
Yeah, so we can share that.
Yeah, it's still recording. The biggest area that I've seen it work so far the best, and you know, granted, it's not a whole lot of data points, but Laurent so far seems to have it the best that I can tell with the level of engagement that they have, the fact that they put 4 coordinators in place for short interval control, you know, this back and forth between supervisors and wanting to be able to expand it. You know, so far they seem to be the best that I've seen. You know, 777 certainly got started with it. We had things going. But to me, Laurent has kind of taken it to where I'd like to be able to go with it from a second point of view. I don't know how Vale thinks about this. I think they think a lot with regards to this, and I'm not sure how others think about it from that point of view. Any other questions, thoughts, comments?
All good from this end, Ken, though I'm a little nervous now that you said you recorded it. You know, when you went to go let the dog in, Nathan may have said some pretty nasty things about you. I'm just saying.
All right.
Come on, Ken and I rip on each other all the time. That's par for the course.
Yeah, it's
right
pretty
on.
brutal. Yeah, it's pretty
Consequence of working underground.
That's right.
True story.
Thanks, Ken.
No, it was really good, Ken. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Ken.
Thanks, Ken.
I really appreciated the looking at this. I suppose you could call it the more qualitative rather than quantitative side of it. It really makes sense.
Oh, I'm glad, Ted. You know, I could certainly, you know, certainly we could take more of this stuff forward. You know, I'd be glad to go over it more, or whatever, help you guys in South Africa too. But when we talked yesterday with regards to HUD Bay 777, this is what we get at it, kind of from in behind why we've attacked it in certain ways. So. Okay.
Great.
Thanks again, Ken. I'll line up some time for us to discuss with my guys next week. Thank you.
No problem. I know they couldn't attend. I tried to get Dave and Wayne, but I think they were both on vacation, as you were saying.
No problem. We'll get them on the line. Don't you worry. You leave that task to me.
All right. Okay. Talk to you in a bit.
Thanks, buddy. Take care.
Thanks, Ken.